Alright, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to go over the different kinds of VPNs that are out there because I think most people are just familiar with a personal VPN, which is what you typically see, like those YouTube videos of people running sponsorships for something like NordVPN or Surfshark, where people can go and sign up for these services and get their own VPN. But there's actually different types out there. So I'm going to cover those, the use cases for those, and I'm also going to cover some personal VPN stuff and things that people should probably be aware of when they're using personal VPNs, things that might enhance their experience, privacy, and security. So if you do want to skip ahead to that area, just go ahead and click on the timestamps. There will be timestamps to take you to the personal VPN section. I'm going to cover the business side of things because those work a little different. I'm going to also cover decentralized VPNs because these things are starting to pick up a little bit more steam, a little more attention. I think they're going to become a lot more popular over the next few years. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. So as far as businesses and government go, you'll see these if you've ever worked in IT or if you're about to go work in IT, if you've ever worked for an organization that uses these. You've probably noticed they have their own types of VPNs there, and typically these are they come in one of two forms. Typically they are either site-to-site VPNs, and so there's a couple different ones there. Internal would be all within the company's network. So for example, you could have a site-to-site internal network. So you have an offshoot office that has a VPN that goes to the main branch of a company or a government office or something like that. And then external site-to-site would be one company that's sharing documents or an intranet or something of that nature with a different company to make things like file sharing and collaboration easier to do. And then the other thing that you'll see is remote access VPNs. These are typically what companies will set employees up with. So if they allow people to work from home, they send them home with a laptop or phone or something like that, they will give them a remote access VPN. So we'll go ahead and get started on this stuff. Now, the reason that these site-to-site VPNs are pretty popular within businesses and governments, first of all, you just have to have a secured network. You can't have someone connecting, let's say, from a home computer to the company network, but they're not on a VPN. Just because there's a lot of security issues that come with that, and also because it makes it a lot better for them to be able to have internet access, meaning that they have their own resources inside of the network that can only be accessed when you're inside of that network. So let's say, for example, they have a company website, so to speak, but you can only access that website or access network drives or something like that if you're connected to the network. So that's where these site-to-site VPNs come in really handy. And they also allow for some other stuff. So they also allow for content filtering. Typically what you'll see with IT departments is they will set these up to where they might do DNS filters or IP blocking or a mix of those. Or if you have companies that have proper cybersecurity practices, they should be running an IPS and be monitoring all the network traffic. So that allows them to be able to catch stuff. So if someone were to either intentionally or accidentally try to go to a website that they shouldn't, they could get them infected with malware. So let's say an employee thinks that it's a good idea to try to open up the hub while they are supposed to be working and they're on an employee laptop. With content filtering set up is the company can block that connection. So when you go to type that into Google, it won't show up in the search results. And if you go to type it in the search bar, it's just going to refuse the connection entirely. And so along with that is they can also monitor everything that goes on the network. I've seen posts on Reddit, the people that don't work in IT, I've seen some people get butthurt about this while they're monitoring devices. Well, if it's a company device, that's the way that it should be. They are completely within their rights. I don't agree monitoring employees' personal devices, but employees also, I don't understand why some employees allow companies to be able to install their software on an employee's personal device. But it is what it is. Some people are fine with it, I guess. Now, the other thing is it does allow, like I said, for intranet access. So whatever resources are within inside of that network, whether it be a website, network, shared drives with files that they collaborate on, whatever the case is, as long as you are connected inside of that network. So this means that an employee, let's say they are have a remote access VPN set up on their laptop, they're working from home. If they have that VPN set up, is they can go in and access things like network drives that has files that they need to be able to do their work. But if that VPN access were to be cut off, let's say they log out of it or their VPN goes down for whatever reason, is it cuts all of that off so they can no longer access any of those files. And I realize there's some other solutions out there. A lot of companies are moving to SaaS these days, software as a service. It's what I've been using for a while. It works a little more slick. I like that better than having stuff set up this way if possible. But this is very popular, especially with big businesses. And then the other thing is it can also be set up to restrict connectivity. So you cannot access certain, or they may even set it up so you can't even access anything at all until you connect to that VPN. So basically they set it up with a kill switch where the internet won't work until you've set it up on the VPN, because they want to run everything that you're trying to do through the internet through their system first, where the IPS can scan all the traffic, make sure there's nothing malicious that's going to end up getting passed on to the employee's laptop or something of that nature. Now, what they typically will do in this instance when you're using company computers, company devices, is they will use IPsec. Now, IPsec is one, it's Internet Protocol Security. This is one form of setting things up for VPN. You can also use PPTP, which is point-to-point tunneling protocol. There's OpenVPN, Wireguard. I'll cover those two here in a little bit when I get into the personal VPN side of things. Just so you're aware, if you are on Windows, for example, you can actually go into Windows at the, and this is still true on Windows 11, by the way. If you go to your network settings and you try to set up VPN through Windows, you have the option of setting up PPTP. Now, just keep in mind, it's a really old protocol at this point. It does have known security vulnerabilities. The encryption is weak on it. Basically, it's a huge security hazard and you should not use it. IPsec is still good. Now, IPsec operates at the level 3 on the OSI level, meaning it operates at the network layer, which is important because, like, for example, when you're doing site-to-site network connectivity, that's where this really comes in to be important. Now, IPsec has a lot of compatibility and support. So like I said, now if you open up Windows to go set up VPN, let's say you don't want to use a VPN application for your computer. What you can do then, and I just pulled up IVPN as an example here for people to be able to see, is you can come in here and set up like IPsec, for example, or you can, like I said, set up PPTP. You don't want to use that, like I said, just because it's got so many security problems, but you can do IPsec through Windows, but it does not support OpenVPN or WireGuard. Now, you'll typically see, and you'll also see this on routers, the routers that have the ability to set up a VPN at the router level. So something like pfSense or Cisco or Palo Alto or one of those other options, they will have this right here. And the reason that you'll typically see that, IPsec has it's long-standing and it's got a good track record. And so it also meets regulatory requirements. So thinking of this from a business perspective, where insurance companies have to go in and assess the cybersecurity practices to say, okay, well, are you compliant with all this stuff? Okay, then we'll insure you. If you're not, here's what you need to do to fix it. And then also from the government aspect, because you also have to take into consideration is that this is also used to connect networks together that may be passing classified information. So in that case, even though the OpenVPN, and especially WireGuard, because WireGuard, like I said, I'll cover that one here pretty soon. Yeah, it might be newer, and there may be a case where you could make where it would be more secure, is ultimately a lot of that is you have to meet those regulatory requirements where they say, okay, this has been around long enough, it's got good support, this meets our requirements for the time being. The thing is, and this is the difference between business and government and the difference between personal, is business and government. There's a lot of businesses out there that are still running machines on Windows 98, Windows XP, for a multitude of different reasons. Now, typically they're air-gapped. There are some clowns out there that have old-ass computers connected to a network, and then things end up going bad. There's plenty of examples of that out there. But typically they're air-gapped, but it's also because those computers are running things that are not updated to use all of the latest and greatest stuff. So for example, I've seen computers running Windows 98 that had machines that needed the Windows 98 software, but you can't put Windows 10 or Windows 11 on there and have that software run. They're made for old computers. And banking is a whole different beast when it comes to old-ass software, backwards compatibility. Anything that has to do basically with banking or a lot of machinery that's running on an operating system, typically you're going to see older stuff. And it's just because it's been around for a while, it works, and that's the way they do things. You have to consider, or you have to think when it comes time to start updating things, it takes a long time for those cogs to start moving to update stuff. Now, the only one other thing I'm gonna mention here for remote access, because I've covered everything else here, So remote access, this is employee to network. So like I said, this would be a laptop that an employee takes home and then they can connect to the business network, for example. So it's different from a site to site VPN. Now let's go ahead and cover personal VPN. So this is what home users are going to see, and there's some different things that I added in here because I wanted to add those for context for people. So you do have personal VPNs. This is typically what people are familiar with, is something like Surfshark or NordVPN, because there's a ton of different ads out there that you see around on YouTube of YouTubers getting sponsorships and they talk about this stuff. Now there are remote access VPNs that people can use. And typically when you see these, it's going to be something like on a pfSense router, or for the people that are willing to drop the money. Like you can go buy Cisco hardware on eBay, but you can set up routers, like I said, if they have the ability to do VPNs, that would be a form of a remote access VPN that you could set up from your home router. Now the thing with that is you can get extra security, but you do not get extra privacy. And here's what I mean by that. So from the security perspective, I've talked quite a bit about setting up DNS filtering. I think it's a very good thing to set up. Now you can set that at the router level. So when I say remote content filtering with remote access, is you could, let's say you set this up through pfSense. So you set up pfSense to connect to Quad 9 or DNS0. So then you get a whole bunch of content filter, so it can filter out malware and potentially unwanted apps and adult content, things like that, whatever it is that you want to set up. So you set that, you set up your intrusion prevention system, so on and so forth. And then what you can do is you can set up your cell phone for this, where your cell phone will connect to your home computer first, or your home network, and then connect to the internet. So all of your traffic is getting scanned and filtered out for any potential threats and passed to your phone. You can also do that. So let's say you had two different houses. I don't think most people are going to have this situation. Or you could also, let's say a laptop would be more applicable. You're out traveling around on the road and you don't want to use something like a personal VPN. Mullvad and IVPN are the only two that I'm currently recommending. So let's say you don't want to use one of those, but you want to use a VPN that you have set up on your own router. That's where you could do that. So you'll get extra security, but you do not get privacy. So a lot of there's a huge chunk of people out there, I don't know if it's the majority, but it certainly is a huge chunk of people, that the reason that they actually do use a VPN is to go sail the high seas. And you cannot sail the high seas if you're going to use a remote access VPN, because your real IP address, the one that you have set up for your home network, is going to show up in the IP swarm. So if you're the kind of person that wants to go sailing, you need to make sure you're taking some different steps here. And that's all I'm going to say about that, because I'd rather not get in trouble for talking about this stuff a whole bunch. Okay, so let's move on here. So there's a few things that I want to cover here that's really important for home users. So you get quite a few options if you're a home user. Now this does depend on the VPN service that you have. So for example, some VPNs allow port forwarding and some don't. Some allow you to select between OpenVPN, Wireguard. There used to be other connection options, but I'm seeing those being phased out of a lot of VPNs these days. Most VPNs are going to allow you to only choose between OpenVPN or Wireguard, which are both excellent options. I don't have a problem with either of them. I don't see the need to absolutely have something like IPsec, although in the case of like IVPN, where I was talking about earlier, you can use that. You could go into Windows and set it up to use that. Now there is a few things that I want to add here if you're going to use a VPN. First of all, you should never rely on a kill switch. The reliability is pretty questionable. There are a lot of people, you could go read threads on Reddit, for example, of people that said they ended up with a letter in the mail because they were sailing around and they thought the kill switch was working. But the thing is there can be just a little bit of traffic that leaks out before this kill switch actually flips, and so it can reveal your real IP address. That's how all these people will end up getting these letters from their ISPs, or if they're really unlucky, they will get a letter from an attorney saying, hey, pay this fine or we're going to sue you, kind of thing. So don't rely on kill switches. These are not foolproof. Next thing, split tunneling. This can be pretty handy. So if you have something where, let's say you have an application that you don't want to have VPN traffic go through, let's say a web browser so you can access merchant sites, banking sites, things like that, that if you were to connect through a VPN, there's a possibility it could trigger a fraud detection because it's detecting you trying to log in from halfway across the world and it thinks that your account's being hacked. Some banks and some merchant sites can pick up that, oh, it's a VPN, so it's probably legit, but some will also think, okay, well, this is malicious. Why are they trying to connect with a VPN? There's also the fact that a lot of criminals these days are also using VPNs. So there's quite a few organizations that just will not allow VPN IPs where it will just flip a fraud detection. The other thing is there's also an option with these to be able to do multi-hop, which is where instead of going from your connection, so you being here, and then it goes to the VPN and then to the website, a multi-hop would be you just add an extra hop in here that then goes to the website. Now, as long as that has been implemented properly, it adds to your privacy and security. Now, it's layered encryption, so you have your encryption coming from here to your device. When it gets to this first hop, it strips a layer off. This is kind of similar to how Tor works. Then when it gets to here, it strips the other layer off, and then it sends this traffic off to the website. So you do get the benefits of layered encryption. You also get the benefit, so if you have different jurisdictions selected, which you should, I don't see why people would do multi-hop with, let's say, 2 US servers, for example. Let's say you are in the US. If you're gonna multi-hop, then you should use 2 different countries for jurisdictional reasons, and it can enhance your privacy as long as it is done properly. Now, what they ideally should be doing is instead of, and this depends on the VPN provider, but what they ideally should be doing is you make that connection with the first server, it has to know who you are to be able to authenticate that you're actually allowed to use the service. So if it's a username, password, whatever the case, then if it's doing things properly, what it should do is generate a token that then passes that connection off to the next server. So that next server does not know your identifying information, so your username or password or anything like that. I don't think either way, if you're in a position like that where you need to be worried about things that much, this is not going to be a good solution for you. You need to look at using something like Whonix. I'm just covering this here to give some basic details so people get a better idea of what this is for. Now, when it comes down to Wireguard, OpenVPN, and IPsec, now I've looked around quite a bit and I've seen some varying numbers. What I can't seem to get a solid figure for this, but OpenVPN has between about 70,000 to 100,000 lines of code. Now, Wireguard is a newer protocol. I've been using it for a few years now, and it works great. It's much lighter weight. It has, the numbers that I could find was between 4,000 to 7,000 lines of code, and IPsec has 400,000 lines of code. Now, IPsec is used basically for different purposes. If you're just gonna use a personal VPN at home, WireGuard works absolutely fantastic. OpenVPN is really good too, but after doing quite a bit of testing, WireGuard certainly is the faster choice out of all these, which makes sense because you have way less code running here than you do even just under OpenVPN. There's a few things to add here if you're going to do this. Some VPN applications will allow you much more granular control, and some might not. It's going to depend on who you pick. Typically, you should get a lot of providers that give you the option to select the different ports that you want to use, and then whether you want to use TCP or UDP. Now, TCP has error correction, so it's better for reliability, but it is also a little bit slower, whereas UDP does not have that, so it's a touch faster. I'm gonna tell you, I've done quite a bit of testing with these two, and granted, my internet is somewhat faster than most people have, but I have not noticed a significant difference between these two, and I personally prefer to use TCP. But there are cases where you might not be able to use TCP, so for example, on WireGuard, you might only have the option of being able to use UDP. Again, it's going to depend on your VPN provider. Now, as far as the ports go, TCP on port 443 is really good for blending traffic. Now, port 443 is used for HTTPS traffic. So whenever you go from your computer and you want to connect to a website, and let's say you open up Firefox and you type in google.com, it's going to be encrypted with HTTPS, which goes through port 443. Regular HTTP traffic goes through port 80. Now, if you use TCP on port 443, that traffic can blend in and it can help get past potentially some blocking. It can basically blend in with HTTPS traffic. Now, UDP, so you can do UDP over port 443, but it's less common. So there is a chance that that could end up getting blocked. This really isn't an issue. For the vast majority of people out there, this stuff really isn't applicable for most people unless you're in a place that's restricting internet. Unfortunately, what we're seeing is more and more these days is even in these countries that are Western, is we're starting to see some freedoms that are being eroded away, which is pretty ridiculous to see, which is why I think it's important to talk about security and privacy, because people, I think, really need to learn about this and take more of an active role in their participation in this stuff. Now, what you may end up having to do, so if this applies to you, let's just say that it does, you may need to use a different port to bypass those restrictions. So let's say there's some sort of restriction on using TCP 443 with your VPN. You might need to use a different port. Now, if that comes into play, you might also need to obfuscate your VPN traffic in general, which means you might need to use something like V2Ray or SOCKS 5 or something like that. So for example, some of the VPNs out there now are integrating V2Ray, which will mask your VPN traffic so that it just looks like regular internet traffic. And then the other thing that you can do with a personal VPN is a lot of them are doing malware filtering. Usually there's a sometimes there's a toggle, sometimes there's not, because it can break legitimate websites, but typically they're pretty good about not doing that and they keep their lists pretty well up to date. So they might use something like the OISD list as an example of one of the IP lists, but they can block out malware before it can even have a chance to get to your computer. So that is one thing that can help people out. Okay, let's cover decentralized VPNs. These are picking up popularity, and I figured it's worth mentioning, but I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about this because these are still at least a couple more years away from starting to become more commonplace, at least a couple of years. Now, dVPN means decentralized. Now, this is part of the blockchain, and I'm just going to mention something real quick before I move on any further, because I know a lot of people get really sensitive about blockchain stuff. Some people really like it, some people really don't. I'm going to say this. Blockchain is going to become massive. Web3 eventually will be the way of the internet. It may take 10 years, it may take 15 years. I don't think it would take more than that. It's going to become a big thing, and it's going to be the way of the web in the future. Maybe I'll be wrong and people can come back and criticize me that, hey, you got this wrong. I really don't think that I am, and I'm pretty well keeping up to date and informed on this stuff that's going on. Blockchain's becoming a pretty big deal. Again, I know people don't like talking, the people that are against Web3 don't like talking about it. It's going to be the way things are done. For better or for worse, that remains to be seen. I think in a lot of ways it would be better though, because it would be decentralized and it would take a lot of power away from powers that be that want to try to block people's access that have done absolutely nothing wrong that shouldn't be blocked. And unfortunately, the UK is an example of this. If you've taken a look at the UK over the last few months, some of the legislation that they have put forward is restricting their people from being able to use the internet in a way that is reasonable. And they're trying to put restrictions through their laws that could affect people in other countries. I think it's completely out of line to do that. But hey, that's just my opinion. So now blockchain, so this is versus a centralized system. So if you use something like Mullvad or IVPN, it's obviously centralized because you are doing business with a company. Now that can come with the downside of info collection. Mullvad has for sure shown themselves to be trustworthy with people's info. There's a whole story about that was done probably 4 or 5 months ago at this point, where they were raided and the authorities walked away with nothing. They raided their offices in Sweden, walked out with nothing. But there are also articles out there where VPN providers said, oh, we don't collect any logs. And lo and behold, they were caught collecting logs later. So that's one of the issues, is you do have to trust your VPN provider. And like I said, Mullvad and IVPN are the only two that I'm recommending right now, because I really cannot stand the business practices of some of these VPNs. I think they use some pretty disingenuous marketing. Now, if you're going to use, you can use these now, and I don't recommend doing that, and I'm going to cover the reasons why. But if you do want to use a decentralized, or if you want to try it out at least, here are some things you need to keep in mind. If you're going to do this, you should have 3 nodes set up for privacy. Now, some of these providers will only allow 1 hop, meaning the node can see your IP and the IP that you're connecting to. There are obviously privacy issues with that. So the way to think about this would be kind of like how you would think about Tor, for example. So with Tor is you have your 3 nodes, and that's the way that it should be. So if this is you, you have node 1, node 2, node 3. So this is your guard or entry node. And this is your middle relay, which is traffic getting passed through to here. Does not know your IP address, but it also does not know the destination IP address. Then that gets passed to your exit node that then sends that traffic over to the destination. Here's why this is important for decentralized VPNs. The way to think about these would be, and how you would want to think about Tor, is because these are on the blockchain, these servers, and there's a few different options that are out there. I'm going to talk a little bit about a couple of them, but these people can set up these blockchain decentralized VPN servers. But the thing is, they're basically like Tor nodes because it's just a random person at some house that's setting up their hardware to work as a node. So I think that pretty well explains why you need to have 3 nodes to have proper privacy and security, because you don't want any single person. There's a level of trust between a business and a person, because a lot of businesses, if they were to violate the user's trust, and Mullvad, I'll use Mullvad as an example. Let's say Mullvad were to ever get caught collecting logs. It would irreparably damage their business, and they would very likely end up going out of business, especially with the way they run how they run things, where they don't even do advertisements or anything of that nature, because they have relied so much on building trust with their community. Now, the same cannot be said for a random citizen that's going to open up a node where they don't have there's no business interest there, where if they're collecting things, there's no business interest for them to, well, this is going to damage my reputation. I'm going to cover some logging things here in a minute as it relates to decentralized VPNs. I'm going to pull up some articles for people to look at. Now, maybe I'm not getting something correct here. Maybe I am not understanding something properly. Maybe these decentralized VPNs work differently than how I think they do. And maybe someone that's really familiar with decentralized VPNs will drop a comment down below and let me know if I'm wrong. I do not understand how these decentralized VPNs can say that there are no logs being collected. And I'm going to take a look at some wording because I want people to see this, because I notice wording is very particular, and I think there's a reason for that. Now, the thing is there's not centralized log. I do believe that they are not collecting centralized logs, but I do believe that nodes themselves can collect logs. And so when they are advertising themselves and saying, oh, well, this is a log-free service, we don't collect logs. Well, okay, that may be true, but that says absolutely nothing about the nodes. And I have looked through multiple services and multiple offerings, and none of them have explained that the nodes cannot connect logs of people's traffic. And the thing with that is you have your home computer, you're sending your IP address to the dVPN node, who then sends it onto whatever website it is that you want to visit. They have to collect those IPs and figure out where traffic needs to go somehow. So unless these guys have figured out some sort of secret sauce here that will not collect logs at all, I don't believe this claim that they are not collecting logs, and we're going to talk about that here in a minute. Now, as far as how all of this works with these decentralized VPNs, you do have to pay for access, and I've taken a look at the pricing to kind of get an idea of what it is like as opposed to something like a centralized VPN, so like Mullvad or IVPN. And it seems like once you get to about 200, maybe 250 gigabytes is where it makes more sense to just use a centralized VPN. So people can earn money just for having a node and running it, but there are security issues that come up with that, and access issues, and there's also legal issues as well. So when I say security, obviously you don't want to have your connection, stuff that you're trying to access, go to one decentralized node where someone can have logs of what it is that everyone's doing, and then that gets passed to the destination. Then there's also the fact that they need to have their shit set up properly, which hopefully these dVPN companies are doing, is doing some sort of an audit on the machine to make sure that it's passing the checks that it needs to. Then you have the access. When I say access, this is things like when you run VPNs, I'm sure people that run VPNs or have ever done stuff through Tor have noticed this. There are websites that you come across where they will just block your traffic, or they will, anytime you go to access it or try to load up a new page within the website, is you have to do a CAPTCHA, because a lot of people will abuse these services to do things that they shouldn't be doing. And those IP addresses get captured, and then they get logged into block lists that get uploaded to the internet. So OISD is an example of a pretty popular IP block list that can be used across enterprise hardware, or even on something like pfSense that will allow you to bring in block lists. Which, to be fair, this is also an issue with regular VPNs and with Tor, so it's really not any different for dVPN. So it can be the same thing where they have their IP address that they're sending out to connect to the service, but once enough people get on there and abuse that privilege, then it can cause issues with being able to access websites. And then there's the issue of, so for example, Tor node operators that operate exit nodes specifically end up running into quite a few legal issues where they have to constantly be in communication with law enforcement or attorneys or whoever, because they're getting letters in the mail saying, hey, this IP address was identified, it was used to access illegal content, whatever it may be. You need to cooperate with us and tell us what's going on here. And a lot of the Tor exit node users have said, oh, well, it's really not a big deal, we haven't had many issues. But that can also come down to, it would also depend on what country you're in, where some countries it may not be very friendly to be able to have that. So, you know, these people that are opening up these nodes are taking on a little bit of risk with doing this stuff. And then there's also the aspect of privacy. Now, I realize there's different ways to do this. Now, Monero is probably the most private crypto token that's out there, and I'm not going to go into a big long breakdown of crypto coins in here. But the fact of the matter is, when you're going and purchasing stuff, let's say you're going and buying coins and then you are sending those crypto coins off to somewhere else for a service, it's all on the blockchain. That's all public. Like I said, unless you're going to use something like Monero, which has way more privacy, people that think, because a lot of people have this idea, because this was passed around for a while, that, oh, well, Bitcoin and Ethereum and all these other crypto coins have really good privacy. No, they don't. Because once your identity gets tied to your wallet ID, then everyone can go figure out what it is that you're buying through your wallet. They can figure out where you're transferring money to, where you're transferring money from, where you're transacting. So I don't see the privacy there. Yeah, there might be a little more, because let's be honest, most people that are going to pay for a VPN are probably going to do it on a credit card. So your credit card company is going to know if you're buying a personal VPN, unless you really want to buy Mullvad through something like Monero. But that is something to keep in mind. So let's go through some different things here. I want to show people some stuff. So first of all, for the people that are the blockchain enthusiasts coming in here saying that, oh, your claims about logs is bullshit. First of all, this is Deeper Network, which is one of the decentralized VPN offerings. In here, they specifically have a section talking about logging IP addresses. You can see here that IP addresses get logged. And so this is what I'm saying for the people that watch this video and you're trying to enhance your privacy and security. If you're going to use a decentralized VPN, some of these only allow you to do one hop. So these people that are running these nodes, these random people that you have no idea who they are, if you're only doing one hop, they get to see your IP and the IP that you're connecting to. There's obvious privacy issues with that. I would rather trust a VPN company or my ISP as opposed to a random person somewhere across the world. But some people are fine trusting some random person more than their ISP or a company like Mullvad. If that's you, fine, I don't give a shit. Now, the next thing I'm going to talk about, because IVPN called out this article here from Mysterium VPN, and I had to pull this up on the Wayback Machine because they have deleted this off of their website. And IVPN called them out on a specific section, which was that no one can see your IP address, which they said is misrepresenting things, and I agree. And it says hide your IP address from everyone, even from us. And now the wording is really important on this. They say no logs, no footprints. Mysterium VPN couldn't track your logs even if we wanted to. to protect your online activity through a truly secure decentralized VPN. I do think that this is worded correctly from the perspective that they do not have logs. If you look at the wording here, it says hide your IP address from everyone, even from us. No logs, no footprints. Mysterium VPN couldn't track your logs. So what they're saying is, hey, us at Mysterium VPN, we can't track your logs even if we wanted to. Okay, well that may be true, but like IVPN said, is that's misrepresenting things. Now there was another article here that was just published on Mysterium VPN, because I couldn't find the article at first. I'm like, okay, well let's look and see if maybe I missed it. There's this other one written here. Now I'm gonna point out ahead of time. Actually, well, let me just read this because I want people to see this. This is why I do not like most VPN services, and it's why I only have 2 that I recommend. I want you to read this. I'm going to read this along and so you can follow along. So it's talking about what no-log VPNs are. And it says, but the magic of no logs doesn't end with privacy, it extends to security. In the realm of Mysterium VPN, the enchantment lies in decentralization. Instead of storing your data on a single vulnerable server, Mysterium VPN disperses it across a decentralized network. Every piece of data becomes a magical pixel and a digital tapestry, making it nearly impossible for any unwanted intruder to reconstruct the full picture. It's not just about disappearing, it's about leaving a puzzle behind that no one can solve. The beauty of no-log VPNs, especially those embracing blockchain technology like Mysterium VPN, is that they rewrite the rules of the game. It's not merely about securing your data, it's about reshaping the entire landscape of online privacy. The magic lies in empowering individuals, giving them back control, blah, 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 blah. Mysterium VPN's commitment to decentralization transforms online security from a mere shield to a formidable sword, one that cuts through the complexities of surveillance, so on and so forth. So I'm going to mention one thing here real quick before I talk about these paragraphs here. First of all, this article was written by a copywriter. And I get it, copywriters use flowery language to try to get people's attention and whatnot. This is not an attack. I don't want people to think this is an attack on the writer, because Mysterium, from my understanding, just pays these different content writers to write articles for them. And Mysterium probably told this guy what it is they wanted him to write. Because I know my videos are starting to get more views, and especially because my VPN videos talking about privacy and things like that are becoming more popular. So Arturus, if you do read this, or if you watch this video, my recommendation, be blunt with people, tell people straight up what it is that you're talking about. There's no point in talking with this flowery language. The people, especially people that are looking into Web3 stuff, already have a pretty good knowledge of technology. You don't need to explain things to people that comes across in this weird way, magical pixel and a digital tapestry. Just tell people straight up how things are. You don't need to use language like this. But again, I realize he's a copywriter, so he does stuff like this, and that's part of his job. My issue here lies with Mysterium VPN, because they want these articles written, and they posted this article on their website. I did not see in this article of them talking about nodes and log collection. And I saw nodes brought up a little bit here and there, like it was brought up here that your online activities are distributed across a myriad of nodes, but nowhere in here does it mention actually that nodes themselves cannot log anything. And again, IVPN called this company out, which is one of the reasons that I wanted to bring this up. But I see this as an issue, not just with this VPN. I don't want people thinking I'm singling out Mysterium VPN here. I'm calling out a lot of VPNs because a lot of them have really shitty business practices where they misrepresent things. They try to say one thing, but because the way the wording is it gives people a different impression. One of the things that you'll see is, oh, well, we use military-grade encryption. Okay, great. Well, everyone should be using military-grade encryption. That should be the standard. So AES 256, for example. But again, any of these blockchain bros, these crypto bros, the NFT bros, the Web3 bros that are going to come in here, literally there's an example right here that these nodes can track traffic. So for anyone that wants to consider a decentralized VPN, you absolutely need to make sure that you find one that has multi-hop, because some only allow one hop. With all that being said, this video has gone on way longer than I thought it would. Seems like these days I cannot make a 20-minute video for the life of me because I have so much information that I cover. Maybe one of these days I'll be able to put out a shorter video, but such is life. Anyway, with all that being said, I appreciate the support as always, and I will see you on the next video.